Ciao friends! In this video we're going to see how to solve common mistakes in filter arguments of the calculate function. When you write a calculate function in DAX, usually you write filter arguments, logical conditions that you want to apply to the filter context to obtain the required result. However, sometimes you write a condition, but you get an error message that is not easy to understand. So we will try to explain these common error messages, and we will see what are the best solutions to obtain the required results. Let's start with the demo. So I prepared a number of demos to show different error messages. And for the first one, I want to apply a filter over the country where we made sales. Now we have the country in customer and store table, but let's start filtering just the customer country region, just to start to remember what happens when we write a filter condition in calculate. So for example, I could write customer country region equal to United States. And what I get as a result is that the sales amount measure in sales country sales that you see in this area of the report is filtered by only including those customers in the United States. I can certainly change this condition including more countries. For example, I can type Canada, and this way I include the customers that are either in United States or Canada. And as you see, the number is slightly larger than before. Now, remember, a filter is a table. So whenever we write a filter condition, what happens is that the DAX engine has to translate this condition into a table expression. And the table expression must include the columns that we specified. And the columns are retrieved using the all statement, including the list of the columns that we specified. Now, because we have only one column, we can just include customer country region. And remember, we don't have to write a code this way. I'm just explaining what happens underneath when we write a single filter condition with a predicate. So my line 6 highlighted now is translated into the filter we see from line 4 to line 7. When I execute the code, the result is identical because, of course, this is just a translation of the extended syntax that is obtained automatically. Now, we could include another filter using 2 or more columns. For example, if I include sales quantity multiplied by net price greater than 1000, if you look at this condition now is referencing 2 columns of the same table. And I can validate this measure. This measure is applied and actually filters the data for those 2 columns. But remember that underneath, a filter is a table. And in this case, we obtain the table filtering all the unique existing values in sales quantity and sales quantity. Oops, I made a mistake. Sales quantity and net price. Sales net price, of course. So what happens is that the table that is obtained by the filter from line 4 to 7 now, let's include a comma, this table is a table that has 2 columns, and only the existing combination in the table says that satisfy my condition, sales quantity greater than net price. So I wanted to show these 2 examples that do not produce any error to make you aware that whenever we write a condition, DAX has to write the filter statement, and the filter has to use an all statement that has to list the columns specified in the filter. Now, all can only include columns from the same table, which means that we might go in trouble if we try to include columns from different tables, which is what I'm going to do for actually creating the measure I wanted to show in this demo. And in this demo, I want to show a measure that filters the sales made to customers who live in the same country of the store where the purchase was made. So we have a country region in both store and customer. We want to create a condition that says customer country region equal to store country region. So let's get rid of these 2 filters and let's write the filter I want to write. So I want to write customer country region equal to store country region. Now, as you see, IntelliSense is not helping me, actually is not suggesting me that country region can be used in this filter condition. Actually, it cannot be used. And if we take a look at the list of the columns we have in the store table, and in a moment we will go there, but you see that store has a column called country region. But as you see, when I clicked enter, what happened is that we got an error, and this condition actually is a condition that produces a syntax error. And the error says the expression contains columns from multiple tables, but only columns from a single table can be used in a true-false expression. What does it mean? What is a true-false expression in this error message? Well, the true-false expression is the expression we have to write in the predicate. Remember that this expression will be applied to a filter, and the filter must be generated using an all statement that includes all the columns. And guess what? The issue is that we cannot write a filter that has the two columns I wrote here. So let's write. If I write filter, and I specify these two columns in the all statement with a comma, and I close this, and I close also the filter. Here we go. What we get now is all column arguments for all or one of those other all functions must be from the same table. So all is a function that only accepts columns from the same table, and filter all is the actual statement produced by your filter condition in Calculate. So we simply cannot write a condition this way, but yet I still want to create this filter, because from a logical point of view, I want to say, okay, I want to get all the possible combination of store country region and customer country region. I only want to consider those transactions made to customer that are in the same country of the store. I mean, from a logical point of view, I can do that. I just cannot write it the way I wrote it. How can I make this happen? I can explicitly write the filter, but I have to replace the table to iterate with a table that has the values from those two columns that produce a row context that will make this condition valid. And what I want to obtain is a table that has only those combination of country region that exist in both customer and store, and that actually can filter existing transactions. So the idea is that I can do the following. So I have a function called cross-join that can create all the possible combination between two tables. And so I can get the list of the country regions from the customer table and the list of the country region from the store, and combining them together, I get all the possible combination. Out of them, I want to filter only those that have that particular condition, which is the two names has to be equal. So let's write all customer country region and all store country region. Now at this point, the result of the cross join will be a table that has the two columns I want, and this condition will be a valid condition. So let's try, and here we go. Now this is a valid condition. Let's just fix the format, and you see that in the visualization of the two measures, of course, the same country sales is a subset, is always less than the sales amount, because sales amount is the sales amount for all the customers, all the stores, for each particular brand. But when we reduce the scope to the customer who live in the same country where the store was involved, then of course the set is reduced. And this is the result that we obtained. So actually we solved the first problem, which was what to do when the error is that the filter expression contains columns from multiple tables. So columns from multiple tables are not allowed in the syntax that has to be translated into a filter all, but if we can create a table that has columns from different tables, we can actually create a filter that combines columns from different tables. So this was the first example of this list of common mistakes for the filter arguments in Calculate. Now let's move to the next example, where we want to create a measure called sales top prices. At the moment, sales top prices is just a measure that doesn't produce any particular result. It's just a copy of sales amount. What we want to do, we want to change this calculus so that we filter the net price. So we want to apply a filter over the sales net price. And the business rule, so let me write this the right way, okay? And the business rule is that we want this filter to be of those transactions that have a net price, price of the transaction that is above 90% of the maximum value of the maximum price for all the transactions. So if the top price is 1,000, we want to filter all those prices that are greater than 900. So 90% of the maximum value of all the transactions. So how can I do that? Well, I can start typing a calculate. So let me explain. What I want to do, I want to get the maximum value of all the transactions. And if I write this condition in a single statement, I could say I want to calculate the maximum value of the sales net price, removing any filter, remove filters, because I want to include all the transactions. So this calculation has to be made once and has to be made ignoring any filter context. We want to get the maximum value in all the transactions in the sales table. So, of course, this is the maximum value. I have to multiply this maximum value by 0.9 because we want to get the limit, the boundary should be 90% of that maximum value. So if I try to execute this code, I click enter, you see that I have an error. So I cannot display the visual because now the error is the following. A function calculate has been used in a true-false expression that is used as a table filter expression. This is not allowed. What does it mean? So basically the problem is the following. Even though technically it will be possible to create a filter statement, and this is what we are going to do now, that includes a calculate statement, what DAX does, it does not allow you to do that because the presence of calculate involves a context transition. And a context transition in this condition will be a context transition over the iterator over just one column, which is sales net price, which could probably affect the result. Now, in this particular case, because of the presence of remove filters, I'm going to ignore that context transition. But the reality is that DAX tries to avoid to create a syntax that would be misleading, and most of the times you don't want to obtain the context transition for this particular condition. Probably you want to compute this calculate before the filter itself, something that we will do in a moment. So let's see what are the possible solutions. The first solution is basically to manually write the filter. If I write filter all sales net price, comma, and then I write this condition in the filter argument, this filter written manually is a filter that works. And I obtain the result that I wanted. So you see that in the result, we see that the only brands that have a price greater than 90% of all the other brands is only present in Contoso, Prosware, and Wide World Importers brands. Okay, so this is not important, but just to show that we are actually filtering data. So actually this condition works. So as I said, is more a safety feature of DAX not allowing to automatically translate this calculation because the context transition could change the behavior. And in any case, writing the code this way is also dangerous for another reason. What we are saying is please compute this calculation for every value of sales net price. So what we are asking, if there are 1,000 unique net prices, we're asking to compute this value 100 times, 1,000 times. So it's useless. This number is not going to change. The fact that we wrote remove filters means that we want to include any filter. So the best practice, when you have a calculate involved in the filter argument, the predicate of calculate, is much better to prepare a variable. So we call this variable, for example, filter price or price limit. Price limit is a better name. Price limit equals to, and I just paste my code, and then I write in result, the result of the calculate, where I use price limit here. At this point, there is no reason to keep the filter. I can generate the filter automatically. I want to keep some condition that is relatively easy to understand, and I return the result. Here we go. So if I write the code this way, I obtain the same result. I didn't change much before, but compared to the example I shown you before, but now I made it explicit that the calculation of the price limit is made before the calculate, is made in the filter context before the calculate, is made using the external filter context, but most important, is made only once. So I don't need to compute this calculation every time for every single value of sales net price. This can be computed once for all the filters that are applied here. So this is another important example. So every time we have a context transition, we have potentially this error message. So the error message that you have seen now appear because we use the calculate, but actually it would appear also if you use calculate table or any other function that performs a context transition. For example, last date. Last date is a function that performs a context transition. And if you think about the cumulative sales, I have another example that I prepared here. So the goal now is to create a measure, cumulative sales, that sums the sales amount for any date less than or equal to the last date visible in the report, which means that for 2018, we want to see the sum of 2017 and 2018. For 2019, we want to see the sum from 2017 to 2019, and so on. So how can I write cumulative sales so that it actually returns what I want? So I want to write a filter where I say date is less than or equal to, and I have to write the condition, the value of the last date in the current filter context. Now, even though what I'm going to write is not correct, I know that, but I see that this is something executed, not executed, but used often. So using last date to get the last date available in the filter context without applying this result directly to the filter context. Let me explain what I mean with this. Last date is a table function. Last date returns a table that has one column and one row, and the value of that row is the value of the value that we can obtain using max of date. Now, last date returns a table, and last date involves a context transition, as you can see from the documentation on DAX Guide. But if I write this code, you see that the error message is actually the same. A function last date has been used, blah, 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 this is not allowed. Once again, the problem is not that last date is a table function. The problem is that last date performs a context transition. Every time you try to use a function that performs a context transition in a predicate in calculate, you will get this message. And of course, you will just see that instead of last date, you will see the name of the function you're trying to use. Solution, just use max. Max is a scalar function that actually returns the value that you need. Now, in this particular example, so let's just check that the numbers are correct. You see that now the value for 2018 is the value, here we go. The value for 2018 cumulative sales is the sum of these two numbers, and the value of 2020 is the sum of all the years that we see here. So it's actually working, and the only thing I don't like to keep an aggregation in the predicate. I mean, the syntax now allowed that. This was not allowed until 2020, if I remember well. But the idea is that, once again, remember that what is happening under the cover is this. So filter all date, and then we have our predicate here. Because of that, what we're asking, please compute this maximum value for each date we have in the date table, which is not necessary. I mean, we can compute this value once and for all before. And even though DAX could optimize the code, even though I use the max in the predicate, it's more readable and more clear my intention that I want to compute this value only once. So last visible date is equal to the value, the max of date, then I return last visible date here. Once again, the syntax I really want to write is the shorter syntax. I use the filter just for explaining what was happening under the cover, but this is the best practice I prefer to use. So I prefer to filter using a limit, last visible date, that I define in a variable declared before the calculate. This way, it's easier to understand that this maximum is executed before calculate in the previous filter context only once. And this is another best practice for your measures. Now, another example I want to show is what happens if we use a parameter. So in this page, we created this parameter using the feature modeling new parameter numeric range. Once I define a numeric range between 0 and 500, if I remember well, what you obtain is a table that you can see here, max price, and this is the table that we used to define the slicer. So the slicer has actually a connection to the max price column of the max price table. And as you see, there is a measure, max price value, which returns the value selected here. So whenever you move the slicer, the value changes, and the number that we see here, let's return to 500, the number we see here can be consumed in your DAX code by simply referencing this measure that internally calls selected value for the column that we are using. So this is the situation. We need to use max price value as a measure reference in our calculation where we want to define where we want to consume, we want to use the selected value in this slicer. So the goal now is to change the measure sales below max price so that we filter the sales amount only for the net price less than the maximum price we define in the slicer. So if I edit, so let's find the definition of this measure. Now, this is just a calculate. What I try to do at this point, I try to write sales net price. I have to write a comma to avoid the error message. Sales net price is less than max price value. So you see that this time IntelliSense actually suggested me to write the measure. This is different from what we experienced in the first demo when I tried to use a column reference from another table. So actually the measure was proposed by IntelliSense, but when I click enter, when I confirm this measure, I get this other error. And this error is funny because this error is similar to the error that we have seen before for calculate and last date, but now it says a placeholder. A function placeholder has been used in true false. What placeholder is? So this is hard to explain because we don't have a function, a DAX function named placeholder. What is happening is that we are invoking a measure reference here. The measure reference is this max price value. Whenever you have a measure reference, what is happening is that this expression is replaced by calculate, and inside calculate we have the expression of the measure reference. Calculate involves the context transition. This is the reason why we have the error. So we might expect to see a function calculate has been used, even though you don't see the calculate function. The calculate function is automatically generated by the measure reference. But the idea is that we don't have, I mean, DAX should have used a different error message in my opinion, but what is happening is that we have the generic error for all the functions that have a context transition. In this case, we don't have an explicit function because we are using the measure reference. The problem is always the same. The problem is that this expression is not going to change for each unique value of sales net price. It's the same for the entire report. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a variable, for example, max price equal to the measure reference. So let's copy this here. And then I return the value of sales net price less than max price. This again solves the problem. So as you see, it's the same problem we have seen before, and let's fix the format. You see that now when I change the argument, the parameter max price, the number immediately changes. So I can actually use in sales below max price measure the measure reference max price value. I simply cannot use a measure reference in the predicate in the filter argument. Why? Because once again, we are using a context transition, and the context transition is not allowed in these cases. So, but what happens when we want to define a measure without specifying a column? This generates a similar error, but in this case, the solution will be different. So let me explain this with a different requirement. The requirement now is very generic. We want to show in sales profitable those sales that have at least 60% of margin. What does it mean? So we have a measure, margin percentage, that has a particular calculation and divide the margin by sales amount. So in other words, we know that there is a margin that we could display to see, for example, for each year, what is the margin percentage. But when I say I want to see the sales that have a margin of at least 60%, what do I mean? I mean, the problem is that we are not specifying whether we want to filter the transactions that have that margin, the products, the customer, or the store. So we're not specifying what is the target of the filter. And DAX has this problem. If we don't specify the target of the filter, we will get an error. So indeed, if I try to write margin percentage, which is a measure that exists, greater than 0.6, that represents my 60% of the limit that I want to specify for this measure, if I click enter, once again, I have the same error. A function placeholder has been used. Now, in this case, you understand that there is no point in moving margin percentage outside. Because again, the problem is that what do we want to filter? Actually, margin percentage is the target of the filter. We want to filter those entities that have a margin percentage greater than 60%. So what we have to do, we have to specify with a filter what we want to filter. For example, let's say that we want to filter the customers that have at least 60%. The predicate is right in this case. We just have to specify in a filter with an iterator, we want to filter, for example, the customers. So we want to filter only those customers that have 60%. So if I write this, I obtain the sales of profitable customers, right? Because now, and let me fix, okay, I have an example with this measure in the model, so let's use another name. So if I use sales profitable customers 1, I actually can see that this is these are the sales of the profitable customers. What if I want to create the same for the stores? Well, I could create a measure, sale profitable stores, where I simply replace customer with store. It's the same structure. I use a different measure. And in this case, if I use sales profitable store, we see the different definition, the different measure with a different filter. So in this case, we are saying in 2017, the sales of the customer that have at least 60% of margin is 1 million. But when we look at the stores, is a much smaller number because, of course, a single customer can have a large margin. Maybe that there are a few customers with a big budget. But when we look at the store also has sales for customers that are not so profitable. And we see that the sales of profitable stores is much smaller. So probably the customer that has this profit is maybe buying from different stores, or that store also has a number of customers that are not so profitable. So this is another kind of analysis, but I wanted to explain that you cannot just filter by a measure. In order to filter by a measure and calculate, you have to write the filter specifying which column or which table. In this case, it's a dimension table. We can filter a dimension table. Which table or column we want to filter according to the value of the margin computed for each store or for each customer, because in that case, this is actually what we want to do. We want to filter an entity where the measure has been evaluated for each instance of that entity. We have seen examples with the stores and with the customer in this demo. So we have seen that when we use calculate and we have strange error messages in our predicate, there is a solution. The solution sometimes is just to write the filter in an explicit way. Other times we have to move the condition before calculate. Other times we have to embed the measure reference in an explicit filter where we specify which is the business entity we want to filter, so that we obtain the correct result without getting the error message. Enjoy DAX!